In fact, often I had students from China tell me that they weren't expecting this level of propaganda in a Canadian classroom. I mean, that happened easily 3 out of the 5 years, okay, in an introduction to political science class.
In university, you get exposed to some of the craziest, most outrageous ideas. Of course, there's communism, radical feminism, anti-white identity politics, Islamism, studies of taboo sexualities like necrophilia, bestiality, pedophilia, incest. Ideas which are far outside of societal norms and standards. But that's not a bad thing. Exposure to shocking and outrageous ideas that were far outside of my worldview taught me one of the most valuable and empowering lessons, which is simply the idea that it's okay to study things that you disagree with, that we can tolerate views that we don't like, that we can separate our personal politics from our subjects of inquiry, and that we can engage with ideas without endorsing or legitimizing them. But while university did expose me to a universe of ideas that I once thought were unthinkable, university students do not get exposed to all kinds of ideas.
If I ask you to name, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5 leftist thinkers, most students, I think, could do so, okay? They'd say maybe Derrida, Foucault, Zizek, assuming they care about theory, right? If you were to ask them to name a couple of liberal thinkers, maybe, Mill, Hayek, or something like that. Now, if you were to ask them, name a couple of outstanding right-wing thinkers, I believe they would be at a total loss.
Dr. Michael Millerman is a political theorist who recently received his PhD from the University of Toronto. He did his doctoral dissertation on the philosophy of Martin Heidegger and how Heidegger's thought has influenced a spectrum of political thinkers from the political right to the left. Dr. Millerman's experience in the university gives us a fascinating insight into how political ideas are taught or not taught on our university campuses.
A student today can easily encounter basically liberal ideas in a department of political science or anywhere else. They can also be exposed to the leftist critique of liberal ideas. Sometimes there are entire programs that stem from leftist critique of liberalism ideologically, built into their foundation. Grievance studies are largely leftist critique of liberalism axiomatically. Well, if we now look to see, is right-wing anti-liberalism represented anywhere in an intellectually sound manner? In other words, we study liberal theorists, not just liberal ideas. You can actually be exposed to the axioms and ideas of liberalism. And you'll study Marx in a first-year political science class. You probably did. And not only Marx, but Marxists and neo-Marxists and postmodern thinkers. So there's a theoretical basis or foundation, and that's good. There should be, in my view. But by the same token, there should be an acknowledgement of right-wing anti-liberalism as a rich theoretical tradition.
The fact is that while students do get exposed to a range of extreme and radical ideas, those ideas are limited almost exclusively to ideas of the political left.
So there is a huge gap missing in the political spectrum that's taught at the university. But I did have students over the last 5 years come to me from time to time after class, and they would tell me that they are unhappy that their professors propagandize in the classroom. That happened pretty often, actually. And students came to me often and said, this class is missing something, or why are they mocking Fox and Trump and Republicans? And why is this professor only telling us about how stupid conservatives are, not how stupid liberals or leftists are? In fact, often I had students from China tell me that they weren't expecting this level of propaganda in a Canadian classroom. I mean, that happened easily 3 out of the 5 years, okay, in an introduction to political science class.
As an undergrad, I always thought that I guess we don't study right-wing ideas because there aren't right-wing ideas. I guess that right-wingers are just dumb, and that when it comes to right-wing ideologies, there's just not much there to study. But according to Dr. Ronald Biener, a political science professor who recently wrote a book about the resurgence of the far right, that idea is totally wrong. Even today, it's a revelation for me to have it framed this way, but according to Dr. Biener, not only is it the case that far-right thinkers made a significant contribution to modern political and philosophical thought, not only was their contribution very influential, but far-right fascist thinkers were actually the most influential and the most significant thinkers of the 20th century. His book is called Dangerous Minds: Nietzsche, Heidegger, and the Return of the Far Right. You probably know Nietzsche and Heidegger, but you might not have thought of them as right-wingers. That's because, according to Dr. Biener, there has been a conscious effort to reshape the narrative about Nietzsche and Heidegger and to appropriate them in the service of leftist politics. Dr. Milliman's thesis was on exactly this topic: how different theorists, including left-wing thinkers, have been influenced by the right-wing thought of Martin Heidegger.
So Nietzsche, like Heidegger, in postmodern circles, they were both fully appropriated by leftist political theorists, sometimes strategically as a weapon of war, because some concepts in Nietzsche and Heidegger can be deployed in the service of leftist political aims rather effectively. But it is true that Heidegger and Nietzsche can be, and Schmitt, Carl Schmitt, is somebody else, that democratic political theorist. I mean, Carl Schmitt was a Nazi thinker on the right. His books are well worth reading, and he's a very smart man, but the fact remains he was a Nazi thinker on the right whose ideas were very influential on the left. So these leftist thinkers, they are not blind or stupid. They're aware of the existence of right-wing thinkers, but because they stand opposed to the right and they don't want to give it oxygen, they pick and choose certain ideas, certain concepts, certain arguments that may be helpful for their cause. They're very good at doing that.
So if right-wing thinkers were as significant and influential as they were, not just on the right, not just on the left, but across the spectrum of political thought, and since we already study so many extremist and radical left-wing ideas, and since we do so under the assumption that we are capable of separating inquiry from legitimization or endorsement, then why don't we study right-wing ideas again? A common theme in conservative media is the idea that the indoctrination that students are receiving in university is going to transform them into leftist radicals. But contrary to the conservative narrative, it's often the opposite that happens. For those students who perceive that their leftist professors are not telling them the full truth, or that ideas are being pushed on them, rather than turning them into leftist radicals, the university experience can actually ferment a distrust and resentment for the far left. And while a leftist indoctrination might not successfully instill leftist political positions, what it definitely does instill is an open mind and a cognitive tolerance for the study of radical ideas. This is the central theme of Dr. Biener's book on the return of the far right. The idea that through exposure to the radical right-wing ideas of thinkers like Nietzsche and Heidegger, that students will be swayed to right-wing positions like white nationalism. For myself, my education in those issues of right-wing thought did not come from the university. I went to go find it on my own. And my education in right-wing ideas came from right-wing websites, alt-right, white nationalist websites. And I would think that if professors are concerned about how the effect that these ideas might have on people, that they would want to be the ones to introduce and perhaps control the teaching of those ideas, to make sure that they're not perhaps twisted.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is a remarkable shortcoming.
So I contacted Dr. Biener to see if he'd be willing to meet for an interview, but he declined. His reason for declining was that the discussion of these ideas has political implications, and that to engage with an idea like white nationalism would be helping to legitimize it. To engage with an idea is to legitimize it.
you have liberal orthodoxy, basically, a liberal hegemony in terms of most disciplines. In some programs and in some schools, you have the attack from the left, and nowhere do you have adequately represented the tradition on the right. And I thought that once you point that out, everybody should recognize that it's a problem. But obviously that is not what happened in my case, and it's not what happens generally, because it's not just an accident that there's no right-wing anti-liberalism represented on the spectrum. It's part of a political project that has tried to delegitimize those thinkers.
So why don't we study right-wing ideas in university? It's not because right-wing ideas are extreme or offensive or radical, because on modern university campuses, extremist, offensive, and radical ideas are the norm. It's not because right-wingers are dumb or just that there isn't much there to study, because in terms of influence and impact, right-wing thinkers like Nietzsche and Heidegger tower over all of us. And it's not because right-wing ideas have political implications while left-wing ideas do not, because all political ideas have political implications. The reason we don't study right-wing ideas in university is because our universities are corrupt. They are staffed by propagandists, pseudo-scholars, and indoctrinators who very consciously use their positions in the universities to oppress or privilege ideas in accordance with their own agendas.
Professors and educators who don't take right-wing anti-liberalism seriously will produce much more of the problem that they're trying to avoid. That is a guarantee. They don't know, these teachers, that they're shooting themselves in the foot. And the fact that they don't know it tells you the limitation of their own education. And it tells you the limitation of what can be expected from them as educators. The liberal professors who think they can chase right-wing students out the door with a pitchfork, they don't know what's coming to them.
Thanks for watching. There's a whole other component of this story, which is all of the nonsense that Dr. Millerman had to go through for trying to study right-wing ideas on a university campus.
I had 4 faculty members resign from my committee. It was unbelievable to me that at the University of Toronto Department of Political Science, there could be the unwarranted repression of inquiry into political and philosophical heterodoxy.
I didn't even realize this when I first started looking into these 2 stories, but Dr. Ronald Biener was actually one of the 4 supervisors who resigned from Dr. Millerman's committee. So in the coming days, we're going to release an extended version of our interview with Dr. Millerman, where he will tell the full story in his own words. Also, be sure to check out his YouTube channel, where he gives university quality lectures on philosophy and politics. And if you support what Students for Western Civilization is doing, be sure to check out our website where you can make a donation. Or if you're interested in applying, you can do so on our website if you're a current student or a recent graduate. Thanks for watching.